Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, all YouTubers, everybody out there. This is Abraaj Group. Thank you very much for joining us today. I am very honored to have with me Professor Brian Brivati, who is the author of this brand new book called Icarus, The Life and Death of the Abraaj Group, which I'm fascinated by. I am almost finished on the last chapter at the moment, and it's a riveting read. And what struck me the most, which I will ask Professor about. Professor, thank you for joining us.
Very nice to be here.
And what struck me is I have also written an amateur book, I must say, a few years ago on the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, otherwise known as BCCI. So I know a fairly bit about that enterprise and what happened to it. And by following the story of Abraaj and Mr Arif Naqvi in the press, quite simply, more likely the Western media, as it were, the Wall Street Journal and other Western press that we've been reading, I was flabbergasted about the similarities and the parallel, if we can draw a parallel, if I may, between what happened to BCCI and then what happened to Abraaj. And it was literally, I mean, I guess I tried to be neutral and objective in my writing, but I was astonished that could this actually happen again, and is this actually happening? Has it really happened? So, Professor, what are your thoughts? And just for the benefit of the audience here, and somebody who's just maybe come across it and does not know what happened to Abraaj and Mr Arif Naqvi, and what is this about? I mean, I know a bit about banking, but I have no idea about private equity. And I do know that in the chapter, there is a chapter of private equity for dummies in your book as well, which is very helpful. But if it's possible to summarize the Abraaj saga in a nutshell, if you may.
So I think the key thing to understand about this case and what intrigued me about it from the beginning was you have a firm that was the most successful private equity company investing in emerging markets in the world. So that means that private equity put money into companies and they stay for an extended period, utilizing other people's investments in those companies, turn those companies around, sell them for a profit. And the typical way of doing that is you strip out assets, you increase margins, you sell off excess stock, you strip things. It's a negative. It's a vampire industry. Abraaj was different. They were an impact investing company. Their impact was at a deal level. They turned companies around in emerging markets by making them more professional, by getting them to use more professional services. And they were successful. They weren't always successful. Over 200 companies were invested in. They had a proportion of failures, which was commensurate with the rest of the industry. They had some fantastic successes. They were moving from 14 billion under management to 20 billion under management when suddenly articles began appearing in the press suggesting that investors in one of their funds were asking questions about the way the firm was run. Now, you have to understand a little bit about the structure of these things. There was a holding company, Abraaj Holding Limited, which made some of its own investments, but also managed a series of funds. And those funds each had their own investors, and those relationships were governed by things called limited partner agreements. Of all the investors, and I think there were about 600 or so limited partners over the lifetime of the company, only a very small number, 4 investors and 1 creditor, complained. And their complaint was that money was being misused in a health fund. The company was registered in Dubai, therefore the competent authority was the Dubai Financial Services Agency. So in the normal run of affairs, let's say, a private equity company, questions are asked, confidence disappears, the competent authority investigates, it issues a fine, the company challenges that fine, and then they have a big fight, right? And an argument about the level of the fine, and it goes to a civil proceeding, perhaps. But usually then somebody pays a fine, there's a rap over the knuckles, and off you go. If you're Goldman Sachs, for example, and you lose billions of dollars in the YMBD scandal in Malaysia, that's what happens to you. If you're every single US bank and investment house involved in the 2008 crash, not one of your executives goes to jail. Not one of your executives faces criminal charges. Everything is civil, everything is a fine, everything closes around the firms to look after their own, in my view. What happened to Abraaj was rather different. Mr. Naqvi, the founder of Abraaj, was arrested when he got off a plane on the 10th of April 2019 at Heathrow Airport, and he was charged with a multiple indictment by the Department of Justice, which could land him in jail for 291 years. Now, the Department of Justice and the Security Exchange Commission were not the competent authority. In my research so far, I found no evidence that anything was stolen. These were conspirators who minuted all their meetings and published all their discussions online and their findings. And they were practicing a form of commingling, which KPMG, their auditors, approved, Freshfields, their law firm, endorsed, and Deloitte's, who did an audit for the competent authority, identified as an issue, but made it absolutely clear in their audit that no money was missing. So there are a lot of questions here. Why was this company taken down where others have a rap over the knuckles and survive? Why were these criminal charges and not civil charges? Why was he arrested when he got off a plane and is now facing extradition to the US? Sorry, it's complicated stories. It's hard to put in a small nutshell, but insofar as we can get into a nutshell, that's a nutshell.
Which is why I think this session probably have to be split into different parts for our viewers. We might have part 1, part 2, and part 3 over some period of time because there's so much to cover. But thank you so much for that overview and summary. Now, the first question there is why? I mean, I'm just for me to understand the legal implications here. Why is he being tried in the US? What is that US nexus here? Yes, he's a Pakistani national. He's in London. He's in house arrest in the UK. So in London, in his apartment in South Kensington. Why can't he just be tried here? And what has he actually done? If this, I mean, I've read your book. I don't see anything criminal. I don't see that in a court of law you can prove anything criminal. I mean, you've got people with much more serious allegations or maybe sensationalized as well. But I mean, let's just take Prince Andrew's example from this morning. I mean, there's a case in the US. He's not being extradited. He's not even faced any questions. There was a lady, a US, from the wife of a US diplomat who had diplomatic immunity, who very unfortunately killed a young man on the streets of the UK, and she's got diplomatic immunity of not being extradited to the UK. And this man, Mr. Arif Naqvi, who in all general being and reports and articles about him seems to be innocent. And the narrative that I've read, if we don't go by the Wall Street Journal narrative, so I don't understand what has he done, which he is facing, for which he is facing this 291 years in jail. And also, why does he have to be tried in the US? Why can't he be tried in a civil court in the United Kingdom?
Right, and that cuts to the heart of the matter. So let's take extradition first. The extradition treaty between the UK and the US was created as a counterterrorism measure under the Blair governments. And it was designed to speed up the movement of terrorists from the UK to the US, from the US to the UK. It has not worked in practice in that way. Virtually no one has been extradited from the US to the UK. It's been used and is a tool of judicial overreach by the Department of Justice, which operates globally in a series, and we've seen this in a whole slew of cases, as an aggressive world policeman in financial crime. And ambitious district attorneys in the Southern District of Manhattan see this as a route to big headlines and big wins. It does no harm to your political career in the US if you prosecute some foreigners. And there have been, for example, an Iranian case where the judge absolutely lacerated the district attorney's office in South Manhattan for the way in which that case was conducted. So you've got a very aggressive judicial operation globally, which certainly catches some bad guys. I'm not suggesting that it's only after people who should be tried in different jurisdictions, as in this case, and tried as a civil litigant, as in this case. There are cases where it has caught bad people. This, in my view, is not one of them. The reason the DOJ is there is because the investors who complained were the Bill Gates Foundation and OPIC, which is a US government investor. So on one level, that's why they claimed jurisdiction. But on another level, the reason they claimed jurisdiction was pure politics. And the politics was that Arif Naqvi is a boy from Karachi who bought Karachi Electric, the biggest energy company in Karachi. Karachi, as you know much better than I do, the economic engine of Pakistan. Pakistan, the critical country in the strategic balance of Asia. And China aggressively moving to build on that long-term relationship that it has in Pakistan with heavy levels of investment, particularly in ports and infrastructure. The US under Obama, responding to that with the Kerry Act, putting more money into Pakistan, two superpowers fighting it out for economic and political and strategic influence in Pakistan. And Mr. Naqvi decided, having bought Karachi Electric in 2008, that in 2016, it was time for him to sell. That's what private equity companies do, right? They turn a company around, they sell it for a profit. Now, Karachi Electric had seen some improvements between 2008 and 2016, but much more importantly, the company that was going to buy it was promising $9 billion of further investment. The problem was that company was Shanghai Electric. So Mr. Naqvi was proposing to sell Karachi Electric to the Chinese. US interests and US relationships in Pakistan are also strong. It's not one-way traffic for China. And I believe that a message was put out that the US did not want this deal to proceed. The deal was announced in October 2016. Trump comes into power in November, and the deal is blocked. And it's still been blocked. Wow. It's still not been consummated, this deal. Karachi Electric is still in limbo. Now, there's some argument that this is about circular payment. So Karachi owed other state entities money. The problem with that story is that Karachi Electric was also owed a huge amount of money by other state entities. These circular transactions are a real problem in the Pakistani economy. No, this was blocked by key civil servants who would not have done it unless the military-industrial complex within Pakistan had made clear that this particular deal was not going to go ahead. Three prime ministers of Pakistan backed it. Cabinet committee backed it. Everyone agreed it was in the interests of Pakistan. It was blocked by politics, by geopolitics. Now, that's the second level. Now, the DOJ at that point is trying to accommodate a new Trump administration. And they know Trump's number one target in the trade war is China. So one element is just the pure activism of the DOJ. The second element is the politics of the Trump administration. And thirdly, the US private equity industry entered the White House when Trump entered the White House. 2016 saw record donations. Tom Barrack, the head of Colony Capital, was appointed the head of Trump's inauguration committee. Tom Barrack was arrested a couple of weeks ago as a foreign agent of the United Arab Emirates. But at the time, he owned Colony Capital. And lo and behold, Colony Capital picked up for peanuts the $700 million Latin American fund controlled by Abraaj and tried to buy the whole thing. So you can put these pieces together in a number of different ways, right? I put them together, and this suggests to me very clearly this was a geopolitically inspired economic hitman operation by the United States.
So this, I'm completely flabbergasted once again. And when I was writing this about BCCI, and I tried to come in with this angle, looking at facts and figures and looking at timelines, and as you say, a series of precision strikes being administered. In that situation, they kind of wanted to take the top man out, Mr. Agas and Abdi. They wanted to take him out and then take the bank down through various precision strikes. They had plan A, plan B, plan C, and then if one didn't work, they would go to the other one. And here we're seeing exactly the same thing. And also, I noticed we've got John Kerry still involved with the Kerry report, because John Kerry was involved in the previous one as well. But in this case, at the moment, we have a living person under house arrest who's awaiting extradition to the US for something he's completely innocent of, or at least he says he's innocent of. And all the evidence is pointing in that direction as well. There's been no money that has been lost. Every single penny that was owed to investors has been paid back with interest. A similar story that happened with BCCI, where there was £1 billion in liquidation fees, and after all the liquidation cost had been paid, all creditors got their money back along with interest again. So there was no hole as such. Same thing over here. There's nothing criminal happened. The misappropriation of funds in Abraaj was actually, some people I've heard said it was a legal loophole. No, it was in the contract of under the authority that he had to invest those funds legally. He did so, and that's what I've read. So still going back to the point, I understand now about the jurisdiction and the American interests and getting them to be extradited. At the stage we are at the moment, and people thought I was bonkers, by the way, when I wrote the book, and they're saying, you really think, they call me a conspiracy theorist, and talking about you're living in cloud cuckoo land with economic hitmen because of that book as well. The economics the economic hitman book as well. But the point was that I put the facts together and presented the evidence following the Bingham report, similar to the way you have done, whereas yours is more of an academic effort rather than my amateur one. And what you've done is, I don't understand, why is it not that if in a court of law, the evidence that you have accumulated and the facts and figures that and the timeline of events, if this was presented in a court of law, surely they would see it for what it really is, which is a complete.
Let's just be a little bit careful here, because I haven't seen Mr. Naqvi's defense. But let's be clear about what we can infer from what we know. The key figure that's put out there by the Wall Street Journal in the other book on the subject is that $385 million is allegedly missing. They quote a request for a disclosure from a slew of banks by the liquidators. You can find it on the website for my book, abraajbook.com. The actual document from the Cayman Islands is there. And what it says is that we have there's over $700 million of transactions between 2008-9 and 2017-18. We can see money in and money out, and they produce these tables. Now, what I don't know is if that is based on the entire ledger of transactions for Abraaj Holding Limited and Abraaj, the management company. But from what I can see in that document, compared to the Deloitte's audit, which is also on the website under the key documents section, is that it doesn't cover the whole of the ledger, firstly. Secondly, we know the amount he was paid and earned in certain years. And for us ordinary mortals outside of the private equity industry, it is an extraordinary amount of money. So in 1 year, his non-discretionary bonus, I think, was $46 million in just 1 year. But he had his salary, which he didn't always take. He had discretionary bonuses, non-discretionary bonuses. Every time you sell a company as a private equity company, you get carried interest. Most owners and founders of private equity companies take 80% of that carried interest. Mr. Naqvi took 20%. But even so, 20% of a $1.5 billion transaction, like the Egyptian bank that they stole, or the fertilizer company. So all the successful deals, which don't really feature in the Wall Street Journal coverage of this at all the very successful deals generated income for Mr. Naqvi, carried interest. And indeed, he would still be owed carried interest on all the investments that are still going on, right? So actually, I bet you, I don't know this, but I bet you when the defense comes out, they will have looked at the whole ledger. And certainly in his public statements so far, he has said, every single transaction is written down, money in, money out. I don't think he would have said that if he couldn't then go on to prove that there's no money missing, right? So there's no money missing. All investors have been repaid with interest. And then we come to the creditors, right, who lent money. And that money was put into accounts at point of audit to make sure that it showed that the money was not in position. Abraaj's argument was that that's perfectly acceptable under the limited partner agreements. The regulator's argument was that it was not and that there were problems with that. That's a civil technical case based on accountancy rules, and the regulator would try and prove fraud, and Abraaj would try and defend themselves against that. That's what this case comes down to in the end. Everything else is noise and hyperbole, in my opinion. And we can explore why that noise and hyperbole is directed at this man and this company. But the root of it is going to be when the defense is offered. And I personally think his lawyers have not served him well by not releasing more of that into the public domain, because the Department of Justice have certainly issued more of their material into the public domain. So he's been accused, he's been tried, he's been convicted in the media already, and they haven't fought back. So they're being, in my view, very proper, very English, and very, very out of date in the way they're fighting this. Extradition. So in an extradition, it's a formal process. You're only supposed to talk about the extradition itself. Well, Julian Assange, who has not been extradited, talked about every single other thing under the sun and mobilized the entire human rights industry, of which I'm a part, on his side. No one has come forward from the human rights industry on behalf of this Pakistani national who's being extradited to the US on these charges. There is no campaign in his favor. Even the Pakistani government up to now has been quite quiet on this case and has not come out to support him. The lawyers could have done a lot more to mobilize that community and other parts of the media on his behalf. They haven't done it. You can understand why, because the extradition treaty is a very precise piece of law and you fight it in this very precise way. But those who have won because of politics and media, in my opinion, being mobilized on their path to create the noise around the legal route. But in the end, we won't know 100% for sure until we see that full disclosure of evidence. What I have tried to piece together by reading the documents objectively and by being lucky enough to get some interviews about aspects of his life and his personality, not about the case, but about who he was, has led me to decide that this is a guy who certainly made mistakes, who certainly was a harsh taskmaster. If you work for him, would have demanded 110% from you, and was certainly like the sound of his own voice in terms of pushing forward the ideas that he believed in. And he may have made mistakes in the end game. And those around him, his team who are working with him together, they may have made bum decisions and decisions that they should face consequences for if found guilty, but in a civil court with the competent authority for technical matters of accounting. He's not a crook, and he's not a thief, and he's not a conspirator, and he's not a fraudster.
I would agree with that, Professor, and thank you for that analysis. Got a couple of more questions, but very quickly, if Mr. Arif Naqvi was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant gentleman of the international community and still was at Davos and still meeting heads of state, would the story of Abraaj have been different right now?
Well, you answer your own question. Yeah, absolutely. But I would add, and if he had done what the Americans wanted with Karachi Electric, because that's the key in a way. I mean, he may have got help from Dubai. He may have got help from friends in the City of London, friends at Davos, friends in New York. If this had simply been disgruntled investors questioning the commingling, dealing with the report from the DSFA. And I think he would have fought that off successfully. But when he managed, actually, in December 2018, to pay back all the investors who were grumbling and close down the global fund APF6, which was trying to raise the 20 billion, then the stuff started appearing in the press in February, right? So every time it looked like he'd got out of it, something else struck that company. Yeah. And so it wasn't an even playing field. With that in the equation and him being a Pakistani in a white world and a Pakistani in the Arab world of Dubai, he then didn't have friends. In Russia, you say he didn't have a roof. And without a roof, not only was he left to be arrested, also his very successful funds were left to be picked up for peanuts by US or UK companies or people who were working in Abraaj, who were running the funds before the collapse, who then suddenly emerge, in the case, for example, of an African fund, as the director of that fund. So there's lots in here, but yes, I mean, I agree with you. This would have played out very differently if he'd been part of the elite, but also if he'd done what the US asked him to do.
Yes, and of course we know, to sum up, we know that Abraaj, much like BCCI, is still in existence, but in other forms because of the funds being taken over, like you said, by other American or UK firms. Much like the bank BCCI is still in operation, but under different names, different banks and different governments have bought over different entities around the world where it was operating. Which is quite sad, really, in terms of somebody building up their dream and their empire and then see it kind of go away and hand it over to somebody else. And the key thing here, which I'd like you to confirm, is there have been allegations, much like there were allegations on BCCI, which we will discuss in session number 2 because we're running out of time today, and we'll have another special guest joining you for the BCCI Abraaj discussion. But I'd like to understand here, there were allegations leveled at Abraaj in the book by the Wall Street journalist that Mr. Arif Naqvi was from the very outset going out to dupe the world economic leaders and the investors, and Abraaj was set up from the very beginning as a criminal enterprise, and he had a different plan altogether. From my reading and my understanding is that up till these news stories being leaked in order to discredit Abraaj, Abraaj was quite largely a very profitable and successful private equity fund, which made its investors around the world a lot of money, but in the same vein, championing the cause of impact investment at the same time.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, there are a few things to unpack here. Firstly, you make deals successfully. You don't suffer fools gladly. You're ambitious, you're driven, but your ambition actually, and I genuinely think this, is about making a better world, making a difference. Yes, he had a nice lifestyle. Yes, he had houses. They all did. They all do. That's what those kind of people who live that kind of life have. The difference is he had all those things, but he also had a charity that created an ambulance service in Karachi. Now, actually, I don't tell this story in the book, but that's because of something that's very specific happened to a member of his family in Karachi. And he responded to that by, when he could, creating that ambulance service. And overall, his foundations created thousands of jobs for Pakistanis. $150 million of his own money went into that charitable enterprise. Now, it's easy to be cynical about these things, right? And cynical about people who spend money on ambulance services or creating jobs. I'd rather have my rich people do that than try and go up into space, right? And spend billions of dollars wasting their time playing in toys made for boys.
Yeah.
This was a serious person with serious intent in the world. Between 2002, when Abraaj was founded, and 2016, it's a successful company. It's not stellar. It doesn't make money every single year. It's not, and that's one of the reasons why you have to say this isn't a Ponzi scheme. This isn't Bernie Madoff, because some investments did not succeed. Some funds were more successful than others, right? Yeah. It's not every year better and better and better. And it was an interesting place to work. All the people I've talked to liked working there. There are stories in the other book about excesses. The excesses are, compared to most Wall Street kind of stories, I think, mild and unforgivable if bullying took place at any time. But to be honest, the things that they dug up, if that is the worst that happened in 15 years in a company operating like that, then it was a much better run and behaved company than most other companies in the kind of space that they were operating in. In 2016, things did begin to certainly go wrong, and that was partly because Naqvi had been ill. He wanted to speed up the process of taking the company to an IPO, and I think he went too fast, too far in the pursuit of American investors. We can't go into all the detail here, but yes. I think, yes, there are questions and problems about some of the decisions he made in the end of the company. But this is categorically not. And indeed, if you read The Key Man, obviously don't read The Key Man, read Icarus. But if you do have to read The Key Man, then remember, the first 140 pages, actually, Naqvi does very little wrong in their eyes. He's very successful. They don't like him very much, but he's building a successful company. And then suddenly the narrative has to be that this was an organized criminal conspiracy from the beginning. It wasn't. This was, and there are some really outstanding individuals who worked in that firm over many years in the impact investment space, who continue to work in that space successfully. And I think they would be people who you could talk to about the nature of the company in those years.
Professor Brivati, thank you so much for your valuable time. It's been an education speaking to you. To all the viewers, please do go out and grab a copy of Icarus by Professor Brian Brivati, published by Byteback Publishing. It's available online at their website, and also is it abraajbook.com?
Yes, for all the documents and all the footnotes are on abraajbook.com.
Lovely. We can tweet about this. Please do like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And let's try and get as much traction as possible, and we'll see if we can see a lot more of Mr. Brivati on the mainstream media channels in the coming days and weeks. Please do join us for the next episode of this, where we'll be discussing and having a parallel analysis of BCCI and Abraaj, which is something which is very close to my heart as well. Mr. Professor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.